Hello everyone. So in this video I'm going to tell you about one of the most interesting spirits out there, and those are the fae. Um, the fae are not very human-like. As I've described to you before in the Changeling and Trolls video, they're kind of like just pure nature spirits, and similar to angels, they're sort of like programs of nature. So they do what nature asks and they just get it done. With that said, they're not like angels because they have no reverence for God and they're just kind of like, I don't know, they're very nuts. They're similar to angels in a lot of sense, but they're not completely, uh, I would not call them angelic by any means. They're not beings of light, they're beings of nature. So, um, with that said, the Fae exist in a dimension called faerie. It's also called a bunch of other things, but I'm just going to call it faerie because that's the most common one. Um, and they have a lot of rules and regulations there, and if you break them, you're kind of screwed. The Fae love to trick people into doing things. They are magical beings by nature, of nature. They can do all kinds of things. They're very good at illusions. They can um, they're very freaky. They can manifest in our dimension very well, um, and they do so somewhat frequently. It's known that the Fae are kind of dying out as a race, which is why changelings happen and a few other things. When a changeling occurs and that changeling mates, it produces these children who are part fairy themselves. Um, these children kind of continue on the Fae bloodline, and their souls sometimes become Fae in the afterlife, similar to how a human soul becomes a demon or a ghost, I guess. Um, so, the thing with Fae is that, like I said before, they're really not all that human-like. They have all these strange rules, like if you're a human in fairy, you should never eat or drink anything because you shouldn't, and it can cause all kinds of bad things to happen to you. They're very creative beings, and surprisingly enough, there is something nowadays that we call like UFO abductions and extraterrestrials that relates heavily to the Fae. The Fae are all about abducting people, leaving behind circles, crop circles, and otherwise this thing's called Fae circles, which are rings of mushrooms that are indicative of Fae activity. Um, the Fae are there's a big difference between um, your lower class Fae and then the true Fae, which are almost on the scale of how demons are sort of these petty things compared to angels. The true Fae are kind of like um, almost like a dinosaur, I guess is the best way to describe it, of nature. They're like monstrous, they're huge, they're scary. um, they're very vulnerable to iron, and they also have a lot of um, rules and stuff they have to follow. Fae tend to have all these really quirky, like, uh, I guess, things that they can't do, or things that if something happens to them, like, they'll be unable to. Sort of like Rumpelstiltskin, if you say his name 3 times, he has to go back to his home dimension, which is fairy. It's very similar to that. But yeah, so if you're on the lookout for a Fae, you're going to want to look out for what we would call today like UFO sightings and activity along those lines. The Fae have all kinds of powers. A lot of them tend to have telekinesis. Um, they can read minds. They can disappear. They can create illusions. They can um, teleport. All kinds of things. Usually, there are many different kinds of fae. There's your typical light elves, dwarves, trolls. Not just the internet kind. Although trolls are technically human monsters, the thing they come from are like giants, and those are fairly common. Fairy itself is a very magical place. Magic literally just pours out of the sky there, and you can do just about everything. Now, that said, there's also two different sides to fairy. There's the light side and the dark side. Um, Most dark fae, which tend to make up a good portion of the things that any fairy or any hunter will be hunting, they tend to have an intense aversion to sunlight and iron. And the light fae, iron still hurts them, sunlight not so much. The light fae aren't literally like light beings, but they are they're just, I guess, brighter, and some of them do create light, but it's not in the same sense as an angel being an intense being of light. These more so just give off light as a side effect of being a nature spirit. Like will-o-wisps, if you've ever heard of those. Soul lights or demon lights. Um, the dark elves and the dark fae live below fairy, whereas the light elves lives on top of it. Most dark elves tend to have a lot of begrudgment towards that because if they go into sunlight, they immediately turn to stone. Um, Fae are beings of earth. They're made of earth, sort of like humans, but not completely. They can manifest their intervention very well, and when they do so, they sometimes appear as greys. Those are usually dwarves or dark elves. Um, Greys is in aliens, of course. And no, aliens, as far as I know, do not exist. These are beings from another dimension. I guess you can call them aliens in that sense, but they're not scientific in any way. They're great craftsmen, and um, the Dark Elves and the Dwarves have made a lot of incredible tools, such as Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, which if I could get my hands on, is so awesome. Um, which actually, see this? I wear that all the time. That's a Thor hammer pendant. Um, and that's actually because my family supposedly descended from Thor, which is kind of weird. But nonetheless, cool. It's a good perk. But yeah, so not all dwarves are evil. They're just very greedy. Dark elves, all those things, they tend to be kind of freaky. So yeah, no fae can touch iron. Salt slows them down. It doesn't necessarily stop them because they are very tricky, like I said. Um, but yeah, so if you're hunting a fae, use iron and use it good, because they die pretty quickly from the stuff. And yes, fae can die. Even true fae can die. When a fairy dies, it usually is behind like a spot of intense nature. True fae being when they die, at least behind like a forest. If you've ever seen Hellboy, the second one, Golden Army, when that big seed monster thingy, when Hellboy blows its head off and it makes all that like moss and grass and stuff, that's sort of like what it does. True fae don't usually possess humans, but they can. Um, in fact, fae don't really like they possess humans sometimes, but they don't really do it all that often. What they're more concerned with, at least the true fae, what they're more concerned with is like preserving nature, and they can get sort of like eco-terrorists, and that always leads to bad things. But yeah, so yeah, if you're hunting fae, look for UFO activity, use iron, and yeah, good luck. They're really tricky, and they will try and throw you. Yeah, so that's about it. Rate, comment, subscribe, leave in the comments everything you know about the fae, because and maybe a hunter, but I don't know everything. So yeah, good night and happy hunting.